Hello and welcome to a special edition of History Hack. We are here today because basically I can't say no to three sad little faces that want to talk about Wellington and Napoleon. And I don't mean sad as in pathetic, I just mean as in please. So we have with us today, this was all orchestrated by William Fletcher, who you may remember came on quite a while ago now and did some of the Polish Napoleonic stuff for an episode of Pole Position for Alina, because she was determined to try and claim some Polish glory for Waterloo or whatever. So William Fletcher's back with us. Hey, Will.
Hi, Alex. How's it going?
Oh, this was a good idea. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I thought it had to be done. 50th anniversary and all that.
You did, but then I did say to you immediately, if we don't ask these two, they will never forgive you. We've got Marcus Cribb with us, who never ever passes up an opportunity to trash Napoleon, even when he's hungover.
That's about right, yeah. Though I think we're going to try to talk up Wellington today as well, which is also obviously my favourite subject in the world.
Brilliant. Of course. And as usual, the most baby-faced person in the room is the only adult. Zach, hey.
You're right, Alex. How you doing?
Yeah, not bad. So, guys, we're going to talk about the film, talk about how it came about, talk about some of the portrayals, talk about how it fit in with history and what they fudged. So I guess let's start with, had there before this been an epic Waterloo production, or was this the first time someone did it?
Not as far as I'm aware, for an epic Waterloo production. They did quite a lot of lives of Napoleon. Even back in silent movies, he was kind of his individual focus on him, especially Napoleon and Josephine. There was quite a few of them, both in European and American theatre. But they don't tend to focus on Napoleon's last battle really so much, just his life and a biopics of him. So this was a huge undertaking, and we'll go into how big, but effectively as big as the battle, but caught on film.
Brilliant. So how does it come about? When did they start planning it, and how did they go about trying to recreate the Battle of Waterloo?
As far as I understand, it was about 10 years in the planning. I've got a little programme about how it came about. And as far as I understand, like most films, the funding was a big issue. And so it was about 10 years in the planning. And then the big change was the Soviet army agreeing to get involved. And that's what made it financially possible. So as far as I know, that's how long it was, about 10 years, I think.
Ah, so much like Sharp then, it was the presence of a load of Russians who were willing to get shot at for very little money that made it happen.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Oh, brilliant. And
they are a huge part of it. When you see the movie, it's obviously in the pre-CGI era, so when you're seeing all these soldiers effectively running around, and stood around, actually, most importantly, they are Russian, Soviet Army, USSR. And what I always think is incredible is you've got just lines and lines of people filling up the backgrounds, and they are, all soldiers. My understanding of it is they had a couple of different layers of costumes. So for people in the very far distance, they'd effectively just have a blue jacket or a red jacket, and then they'd stitched on a piece of white to make it look like their belts. And then as you got closer, there was a bit of a semblance of realism, and then actually proper reproduction uniforms for the main people near the camera. So it was scaled up, but they did just give people blue and red, and they just told them to stand on the hill for hours as background.
In a way, that was part of the challenge, wasn't it? That to be able to do this effectively and produce something like Waterloo on such a scale, you needed to have either free labour, in effect, or very, very cheap labour to be able to do it justice. But equally, you had the challenge of kind of Napoleon's reputation and the fact that if you're going to focus exclusively on that return from Elba and the whole Waterloo story and Napoleon's ultimate failure, that's quite difficult to sell to certain audiences, because in some parts of America, where you've got to think a good chunk of the audience is going to come from, Napoleon's really popular, and that cult of Napoleon still exists. So if you're going to make a kind of documentary film about Napoleon's return, you've got to cover the fact that he was meant to stay on Elba, he didn't, he came back, he broke his treaty, he ousted the monarchy, effectively led a coup, then led an army into a preemptive invasion of the Netherlands, none of which kind of reflects particularly well on him. So it's quite a hard one to sell to people.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, the cult still persists very strongly then and now. I mean, Zach and
Even
I
after
did a
podcast
on it. He's plugging himself, and I know he is. Look at his face. Yeah, he's completely right. And he had all that, and then also the epic scale of it. I mean, as much as I'm a huge Sharp fan, there's a moment in Sharp's Waterloo that everybody still laughs at, that Wellington points and goes, this is Hugh Fraser, goes, oh look, the Prussians arrived. And it's 3 people on a horse that like appear for half a second.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of laughable. It's like 50,000 men meant to be marching from the northeast. And they're just not really represented. In Waterloo 1970, you've got thousands and thousands of extra people who've either changed costumes or they're held to represent. It's brilliant.
Zach?
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's one of the differences that you see between Sharp, where they're working on such tight budgets, even when they are filming in various kind of cheaply found locations. And you can see that in some of the shots that they put together. Try though they do to produce a really good effect. If you compare that to Waterloo, the film, you can really see the impact of having just hundreds of extras that are used to really good effect, in fairness.
William, you're slightly obsessed with this film, aren't you?
Yeah, no, it's been, since my childhood. I think it's, one of the things, like many historians, where it gets, you've got to have something that gets you hooked into the period. And I think Waterloo, for a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people commenting the last few days on how Waterloo back in 1970, for those of them that were alive back then, was a sort of major thing in terms of getting people interested. And I think as a film, it's still, for all of us that are interested in the period, obviously there's loads of historical issues with it, but overall it's one of those things that gets people interested in the period and gives the general overall impression, which is, a good starting point for most people. And I think that's the sort of real good thing about Waterloo, the film. Okay,
so let's talk about the casting. Rod Steiger, yay or nay, guys?
Huge thumbs up.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, to me, Rod Steiger is like as Napoleon. He is brilliant.
Yeah, definitely, I'd agree with that. I think they get a lot of the key features of Napoleon sort of nailed down there in terms of him sort of dominating decision making and sort of being very confident in himself, and how that sort of all unravels in the 100 Days campaign is a sort of key aspect that the film does get across, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree. And particularly in terms of the look as well, it's very hard to find somebody who looks like Napoleon at that point in time. I know there's been a lot of talk lately about Joaquin Phoenix being cast to
do a sort of...
Yeah, Ridley Scott is going to do I think it's going to cover an early part of Napoleon's life. And there's been criticisms about, is Phoenix effectively too young to play Napoleon? And, whatever. I'm not overly fussed as long as he portrays the role effectively. But that's kind of by the by. In terms of look, Rod Steiger is absolutely perfect for that point in time. Napoleon well past his best, a little bit overweight, no offence to Rod there. Kind of losing his hair. All of those kind of physical attributes are there. And then he gets across the character really well, and this sort of slightly odd version of Napoleon that you get in the 1815 campaign, which is nothing like Napoleon at his best. I mean, there is the odd point of kind of overreaction, possibly because Napoleon is quite a hard person to get right. And there's one that really springs to mind for me when the Imperial Guard breaks at the end of the film. And there's this classic, Will's laughing in the background, knows exactly what I mean. Marcus has just done it, in fact, the kind of overreaction. There's this cry of La Gare Q, and suddenly Rod Steiger kind of turns around and stares at this camera that's suspended above his head. And it looks like Napoleon's checked the weather for some bizarre reason. But apart from that and a couple of other slight overacting instances, it's a really good portrayal.
I love that. You've got to throw in a bit of the overreacting. If you see this, you've got to remember this is a New Yorker or New York State playing a Frenchman. So,
yeah. Well, I was reading online. I'm not sure if it's actually true, but apparently Rod Steiger was advocating the name change of the film from Waterloo to Napoleon after he'd seen himself as sort of the main character throughout, which I think ironically is actually what Napoleon would have done if he had been filmed live himself.
That seems very Napoleon. I'm going to come in. I'm going to be part of this bigger thing. It's all about me.
Channeling it. Right, okay. And his opposite number, obviously, is Christopher Plummer.
Christopher Plummer. As Wellington is fantastic, in my humble opinion. He's far more on the witticisms, the little looks, and the charm as well. Like, it's something that's not really brought about in other, like, Wellington features. I mean, Wellington doesn't feature as much in films and TV as Napoleon at all. I mean, obviously we love Sharp and he's a central character in that, but even then he's, you know, a tertiary character. But yeah, Wellington was so charming. The women just loved him. His men kind of adored him, even though he wasn't affectionate towards them. His wit was up there. You know, he was an advisor to many royals. One of my favourite quotes, when the Queen Victoria asked him how to deal with sparrows, and he just turns around and goes, "Sparrowhawks, ma'am," and just keeps going, absolutely dead-faced. That's what Plummer brings to it. His little affectionate tweaks and eyebrow raises. He's excellent.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that, and the whole aristocratic nature of Wellington comes across really well in the film, and I think, and that's something good that they concentrated on. He could have potentially looked slightly more like Wellington, I think.
I know, they didn't go with the fake nose and make him ugly, did they?
No, not quite that one. But I think, again, a bit like Napoleon, how I think the film gets across how important commanders are in the campaign, and how, again, Wellington sort of dominated headquarters and was the key sort of decision maker on the, you know, Anglo-Allied side for his army. I think that's really good as well, how he's the sort of key figure and there's not too many people getting involved and it's his decisions.
So what about, for me, like Wellington's relationship with his troops? There's some fictional accounts in there. I'm quite interested to hear because Will and Zach do quite a lot of reading into the Peninsula and Waterloo first-hand accounts and the court-martial records, for example. But there's a famous bit with a looted pig, and he promotes him more instantly to corporal and things like that. I find those the most fictional parts of the Wellington and Waterloo, perhaps, but also very enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, the relationship with Wellington and his men. I mean, compared to a lot of other commanders, you know, such as Sir John Moore or you know, other commanders where they were definitely loved by their men. Wellington definitely had a different relationship. In terms of that thing with the looting, obviously Zach will know more about the crime and punishment side of things, but the Enniskillen regiment, obviously, that is one thing, you know, they're famous in terms of being not the best behaved, but also good fighting troops. I think from that side of things, it's a bit of sort of film license, isn't it, to sort of try and emphasize that point. But that story with the pigs, obviously pretty ridiculous. Interesting, the moment when the soldiers warn him about being near the tree, because obviously Wellington's Elm is where he's stationed for most of the battle. And reading into my own research about the staff at Waterloo, that's certainly a story that is meant to have happened, where the men sort of warned him that he was near the tree. So I thought that was quite an interesting part, where there's a relationship between his soldiers and himself, and they're obviously able to actually talk to him rather than like being too scared to even say anything. So I thought that was quite interesting.
But conversely, Zach, you like how Christopher Plummer got across the kind of, do you call it slightly gittish side of Wellington?
Yeah, I'd call it kind of smug Wellington, to be honest with you. But the kind of the mannerisms of the guy, Marcus just pulled a face at me. But you know exactly what I mean by that kind of aristocratic sense of, I mean, there's no getting away from it. Wellington was a snob. Now, that's not surprising by any sense, because he was an aristocrat. He came from a family. His brother was it the Lord or the Earl of Mornington? Well, or Marcus?
By that point, Earl of Mornington, Richard Wells.
Earl of Mornington. So he's coming from...
And Governor General of India, you know, very, very powerful man.
Exactly. Wellington himself has a seat in the Commons. He's got his own estates by this point. He's become a duke. So he's very invested in that kind of sense of class hierarchy. And with that comes a certain way of conducting yourself. And Plummer absolutely tapped into that, but was able to get the humorous tweak that also comes through from Wellington's own letters in his correspondence. And this guy was incredible with the odd scathing put down that could just cut somebody down to size in an instant. And Plummer gets all of that across in this kind of slightly sarcastic, smug way, as I say. It's interesting what Will says about the tree, because for all that the tree was obviously a point that you could pick out as a firing location, something to aim at, the tree was damaged much more by Waterloo tourists in the centuries after, and they would come and take down bits of the tree. And I think in the end, there was so little left of it because people had just kind of broken off branches and taken it home as a souvenir that they had to cut it down, and they made it into a few kind of sample boxes for mementos and stuff, and it's not there anymore.
Set of chairs.
Yeah, the chair as well, yeah.
Set of chairs, which I've seen. Yeah, really, really nice item. But you do often find people come and have what presents for me at work, like leaves, and go, oh, these are meant to be from the elm tree. Can you validate it? And you're going, well, even if we said it's an elm tree from the 1800s, no one's going to be able to prove it was that tree. It's very difficult to do.
It's like what they're expecting, DNA testing or something.
Yeah, all museums have DNA testing on tap, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But in terms of the crime and punishment thing that we were talking about earlier, the story with the pig and the guy who's promoted to corporal, the story is that this guy has gone out plundering because they're all hungry, as the army often was. Supplies haven't come in for the night. They've got to fight the next day. They need to get their strength up. They need food. So this guy's gone out and he's found a pig, tucked it under his, I think he tucks it into his pack or something. And then at completely the wrong moment, along comes Wellington. This pig squeals, and he's rumbled. Now, as a story itself, we do have anecdotes that are very similar. There is a famous one about some dragoons who are riding past, and one of them has a sheep hidden underneath his saddlecloth or something. And the sheep bleats as they ride past Wellington. Wellington kind of turns around, gives them an odd look, kind of gives them a smile and a nod, and then just turns back to continue his conversation with one of his junior commanders. And I think they're kind of tapping into that spirit that actually there was give and take within the crime and punishment system, which obviously Alex and I have discussed before. We do know that men went out plundering. Some men were actually told by their generals that they could go and plunder farmhouses as a reward for continuing to fight and hold themselves together all the way through the night of the 17th, which, bear in mind, was pouring down with rain, thunderstorm, terrible conditions to be standing to be prepared for fighting. And they were told as a reward, look, 3 farmhouses over there, go and get on with it, help yourself to what's inside. So it wasn't unheard of, but certainly the idea that he'd be promoted for giving Wellington a bit of lip is kind of the art of Hollywood.
Let's speak about the art of Hollywood. Is it like Lawrence of Arabia, where, in terms of all the other characters, are they faithful in having everyone who was significant, or did they mash people together to make a character? Are there cipher characters that sort of represent people for artistic purposes? How accurate is it?
My point of view, I think the group of people that are around Wellington is a very odd choice of key individuals to have around. I mean, some of them are clearly important, such as Uxbridge, he's really important, and Picton, but some of the others are pretty weird. I think the most odd character they have there is Lord Gordon. For the Gordon Highlanders, he features quite prominently during the film and during the battle, and he wasn't there at all. He was involved with raising the regiment originally, but as a commanding officer of a battalion in the first place, he wouldn't be that close to Wellington. Secondly, that character wasn't at the battle at all. So they've definitely taken some poetic license there. Same with Lord Hay, who gets killed during the battle. Again, he's quite an odd choice. He's not even one of Wellington's ADCs. He's one of Maitland's ADCs, and he gets killed at Quatre Bras rather than Waterloo. So there's definitely some sort of interesting people they slot in. I mean, with the Hay example, he's famous at the Duchess of Richmond's ball for talking to Georgiana Lennox. So I think that's where they've gone with that in terms of it's a good love story, and they're sort of trying to weave it in. So they made him close to Wellington and all the chats he has with Wellington. So I think there's definitely some poetic license in the film.
It's a bit of a Vanity Fair, isn't it? Where they've gone, we want to have the young, the romantic, the Duchess of Richmond's ball is now one of the most romanticised parts of any military campaign at all. Everyone seems to have been at the Duchess of Richmond's ball, even though there was 200 people there. Every single young captain, and then they all happen to go and die in the battle, it seems. And he dies at Quatre Bras, which isn't really widely shown in the film. So they need to have him die heroically in the battle, and then Gordon seems to be a mash-up of both Gordons, of the commanding officer and one of the ADCs, who dies in Wellington's bed later on of his wounds. So they seem to have a bit like Lawrence Arabia, they seem to have mashed up certain characters, but it gives some of the core poetic license. It's quite difficult where they've gone some bits really strongly historically accurate, as strong as they can do, trying to get quotes from Wellington that they think he said line for line. And then other characters, he died 2 days before, but he's kind of helps the visitor, the viewer journey, I guess. We're seeing things through other people's eyes.
Yeah, I think it's kind of one of those things that Hollywood needed to do. There needs to be some kind of little tinge of a romantic connection going on here. And it's kind of quite a typical thing to do when you've got a war story, isn't it? You have a couple in love, they're torn apart. So in terms of artistic license, I don't take a huge issue with it because everybody does it. Marcus just talked about Vanity Fair. I had far bigger issues with the way that Vanity Fair did things. Try that they did to do it well. And a lot of hype was put into how accurate they'd been. Much more went wrong with Vanity Fair's portrayal than ever went wrong with Waterloo's portrayal.
I'm thinking about, I don't know what, I was watching an episode of Dad's Army, and they're at the cinema and they're watching a Napoleon film, and there's this horrific drawn out scene in black and white with Napoleon going, Josephine, I am leaving you, I am leaving France, and it's the cheesiest thing I've ever seen in my life, and they're all doing impressions of him on the bus on the way home. It's not that bad at all, is it?
No, definitely not.
No, and then you actually, what's quite nice about that is you end up, I think that's the episode in Dad's Army where you end up
they have the
with
flashback dream, yeah.
Little Waterloo scene.
Yeah.
You have John Lemessurier as Wellington's actually quite good.
Yeah, and Mannering is Napoleon.
Yeah.
And I think the bus conductor woman is Josephine, isn't she? I can't remember.
Yes, here we go. Our favourite cast of a Waterloo depiction done. Actually, Dad's Army. There we go.
Yeah.
There's a twist.
What do you make of the whole the plot vehicle they use with the whispering? Rod Steiger doing the what's going on in Napoleon's head.
I think that's quite interesting from a decision-making point of view. I think, obviously, from my own research, Napoleon's staff is very different by the Waterloo campaign, and in some ways, Berthier, his chief of staff, not being there, sort of left Napoleon sort of to think things through a lot on his own, whereas Berthier would have sort of taken up the reins on a lot of the decision making after sort of the initial overall idea came about. So Soult being the replacement for Berthier, I think the whispering thing is quite interesting in terms of Napoleon was kind of trying to work it all out on his own, which was something he hadn't really done before for many, many years. So I think that's quite interesting from that point.
I quite like it personally. Quite like the whole kind of concept of Napoleon thinking things through. It fits with that kind of ongoing debate about to what extent was Napoleon the big decision maker, but also the fact that he's quite a kind of conflicted person at this point. There are things that have gone wrong in his life, and there are lots of questions that we have about his command style at Waterloo that just don't quite add up with some of the things that we know about his earlier career. So I think as a kind of a plot device, I quite like it.
Yeah.
Like a personal sense.
Just trying to make sense of it, basically.
Yeah, completely.
I mean, it's one of if you had no knowledge of the Napoleonic era, it is quite a complicated campaign purely because it is a tale of three armies.
So basically, if you were a leaner. Who heard about this podcast and went, what, on a Sunday? No way.
No, Lena knows the ABBA song, let's be fair, doesn't she? We
yeah, but hearing her sing it takes away all credit that she deserves for knowing it.
I mean, that's where lots of people come from. And, you know, even the ABBA song has it wrong. It says Napoleon did surrender there. Well, no, he doesn't. He surrenders on a frigate off the coast. So it is one of the more complicated because it does portray, I think, really importantly, you've got the 27th, the Inniskilling, you've got Irish, and you've got what it doesn't show is how much of Wellington's army are Dutch and Belgian, but it does show Blucher. And I think that's really important that you've got some versions of Waterloo being told, like Sharp's Waterloo, that basically don't mention the Prussians, who are a huge part of the campaign. Huge. I always argue, that this is my personal opinion, that it's not a Prussian victory. It's an Allied victory. It's these two armies working together. There's too many people say, oh, Blucher saved Wellington. Well, he didn't, because the plan was devised on the 17th of June, the day before. So it wasn't saved. It was basically a trap coming together, in my humble opinion. But it's really important to show the Prussians, to show Blucher, and then we get some fantastic scenes of Blucher, him, again, artistic license, for him cheering them on, saying, raise the black flags, mein Kinder, and onwards, which gives a bit of a Blucher feel, if not historically accurate. It's quite nice.
If you take away Steiger and Plummer, who's your favourite? I mean, you've got Orson Welles, you've got Jack Hawkins, who for me, that's Allenby. That's why he makes me excited. You've got Dan O'Herlihy. What's your favourite portrayal away from the main two?
Yeah, I'd definitely say Jack Hawkins as Picton. I think that's inspired, and also the dusty voice thing, because Picton himself had been in a duel many years before and been shot in the throat, which gave him a dusky voice. So I think, I'm not sure if it was deliberate, but the way it worked out was perfect in terms of getting this dusky voice to come across, I think.
So it wasn't like when Nicolas Cage did that weird voice in Peggy Sue Got Married and everyone was like, what is he doing? There's like a justification.
Exactly.
Zach?
Yeah, for me, it's Jack Hawkins as Picton. In kind of but Picton was a very bullish character, very controversial individual. In some respects, a git. In other respects, a decorated war hero and somebody that Wellington trusted. And to be trusted by Wellington was a mark of how good you were at your job. But Hawkins just kind of brought across the whole kind of the bluster of the guy, that bullish nature. We were talking about how Rod Steiger and really kind of fits the image. I kind of feel that Hawkins fitted the kind of the scale of Picton as a kind of bulkier. I mean, Picton wasn't fat, but he was kind of a bulky guy, a big guy, physically dominating. And I think Jack Hawkins really brought that across nicely.
Marcus?
Yeah, I was going to say Jack Hawkins as well, because he's so good, and also because it's interesting because Picton is so controversial, with, especially at the moment, his connection to slavery. But to say someone else, people like Terence Alexander as Uxbridge, maybe not a perfect portrayal of Uxbridge, but it's really nice to have him as part of the story, especially like the moments of exasperation. You know, what are your plans, Your Grace? I feel I should know. And Wellington just kind of taking a newspaper off his face and going, well, I plan to give the French a damn good thrashing. It's very Wellington. He never wanted second in command. So it kind of, plays into the Wellington side of the story, which funnily enough, I like. But it shows that exasperation of having a second in command. He's appointed by Horse Guards and the Prince Regent's kind of favourite. And it does give them that nice bit of pairing towards the end, just before, spoiler alert, Uxbridge loses his leg. That's all quite good.
Yeah. I think it's also great how they include Delancey throughout the film, because many books sort of completely miss Delancey, who is Wellington's chief of staff. And the film, mainly again because of the romantic thing of him just being recently married, and they include him being at the ball, which he actually wasn't at the ball, he was writing orders instead. But they show him throughout the film until he gets mortally wounded. And I think, weirdly, they've actually hit the nail on the head with that one. So I think it's great as one of the key characters that they've put him in there, which is, again, all because of the romance. But
is there not some epic quote about not wearing black before you wear white as well, which is historically inaccurate?
I think that's to do with Lord Hay, as far as I can remember.
Yeah, I think so.
But that is true in terms of him meeting Georgiana Lennox at the ball. So, but I don't know. I'm not sure about the exact quote though.
No, it's the white thing happens with Queen Victoria, so it doesn't exist yet. Bride's wearing white.
But if you're going to do like tragic love stories, Delancey's the one. His wife even gets time to go out there and like kind of dab his wounds as he's dying from internal bleeding. Whilst actually to do the gore, he's got internal bleeding, so they decide to leech him and bleed him more as a potential cure. But his wife is actually there, and she wrote quite a famous set of diaries from her time in Brussels. But they're the kind of the ones that recently married, eve of battle, going off on this great adventure. Delancey wasn't really meant to be in his role. He's meant to be deputy. But he stands up, and then he's mortally wounded very close to Wellington by a cannonball striking him. So it's quite tragic, but definitely one for Hollywood. In fact, it's probably one for Hollywood that they could have shown on a bit more of Delancey. Always felt quite sorry for him.
Anticipate getting a call from Netflix after this, or they'll just steal your idea. We've already talked about scale. I'm just reading something here that says that, so I checked, and it's 17,000 Soviets used as extras. I think 2,000 are cavalry and the rest are foot people. But it says that additionally, they destroyed 2 hills, laid 5 miles of road, moved 5,000 trees, sowed fields of rye, barley and flowers, and reconstructed 4 historical buildings. And to create the mud, they laid 6 miles of underground irrigation piping. What? That's massive.
When you look at how difficult the Waterloo campaign was to fight, especially because of the weather and the different languages and the Allied nations, like filming Waterloo 1970 is one of the few things that is more difficult than fighting the Waterloo campaign.
I think the director went everywhere with a stack of interpreters, didn't he? To be able to talk to people.
Yeah, I mean, the scale was huge. I mean, the cavalry that you mentioned, I think they got a whole Russian cavalry brigade in. I can't even think off the top of my head how many people that is at that point in time that they're filming. But the horses to the people to get them all organised, you're working with animals, but then, as you say, sculpting the landscape at the same time. And it's one of those really thankless tasks if you're going to make a dramatic depiction of an actual historical event, because there'll be people like me and Marcus who will look at it and go, I can see a mountain in the background, that's not good enough. And in fairness, there are moments when I see kind of French or Prussian troops marching on the field and there's a mountain that they can't do anything about. They don't have CGI, they can't edit it out, and I go, no, not good enough. But give them their due. As you say, they re-sculpted a whole swathe of the landscape, and they do it fairly well. I mean, if people have been to Waterloo and they try and kind of take stills from the film and then compare that to the landscape, they'll obviously see discrepancies. Of course they will. That's going to happen. But in terms of the really important bits, they did a good enough job.
Yeah, I saw, I think it was Will's post online from 2 days ago. And somebody commented saying, I can never watch it. It's so historically inaccurate. They got nothing right. And I'm sorry, that's just not true. It's not a complete scene for scene of the battle, which is going to be impossible because there's so many conflicting stories of the Battle of Waterloo. The Duke of Wellington said himself, you might as well try to write the story of a ball as try to tell the story of battle, because so many different views are there, which is one of my favourite Wellington quotes, because it just kind of says to people, you've got 2 sources that say one thing, someone else has got 10 that say another. Who's right? But there's a lot in the film that is right, and they haven't tried to exaggerate too much. The central cast is quite small, kind of on purpose, because there's already a lot of story to tell. But they definitely put the effort in. This isn't like kind of a haphazard Hollywood style, just throwing big names at something and not really caring. There's definite real effort, and you can tell that. But I think the way it's worked, that A, it's kind of a historian favourite, and B, as you were saying earlier, the people it's inspired to go into the era, it's what Sharp was probably for our generation. It was the previous generation, and even today it stands up there as being just as good, just as enjoyable, certainly.
Will, are you happy?
Yeah, I was just going to say the scale of things, yes, it's amazing in terms of the amount of troops they get involved in. It's difficult to would have been difficult back then, to do it any other way than get that amount of troops involved. And I think some of the shots are amazing in terms of, the one that sticks out for me is the Allied squares when the cavalry are charging around, and just the aerial shots of those are a really good depiction of, again, you can always pick holes in terms of they're all red-coated squares and they wouldn't have been, or things like that, but it's just really good to try and convey the scale of what was happening. And I think that's something that the film really does really well, and especially when they're having to use real people to actually do it. It's amazing.
Zach?
Yeah, just going back to what Marcus was saying, I think the really important thing is that they get what matters right. They focus their efforts in the right area. And I talked about Vanity Fair earlier. Vanity Fair did a big thing about, we've trained these people to fight like the real deal. And they took these people through military maneuvers, gave them kind of a crash course in how to handle the weapons, etc., etc. And off the back of that, we were all meant to look at that and go, that's wonderful. They've got it bang on. And that wasn't really the reality.
I mean, these Soviet troops, apparently they put them through months of training in 1815 drill and stuff.
Well, you kind of have to. And just the other day, I was commenting on some depiction. We were talking about squares. There's a film that came out recently about an uprising in Moscow, I think it was, shortly after the Napoleonic Wars, where they do this kind of thing of cavalry charging at squares. Now, for people who know the story of Waterloo, they will know that in the afternoon, Marshal Ney basically decimates Napoleon's cavalry by charging them all at Wellington's right flank, which are formed in square. And if you're infantry, the way you defend yourself against cavalry is formed square. And there were massive issues in how this film on the uprising in Moscow depicted the whole thing. And myself, Andy, Locke, Marcus, we're all sitting there kind of bouncing off of each other, taking it apart. The Waterloo 1970 depiction gets those details right. And importantly, they come to the same realization that Bernard Cornwell actually came to when he was writing Sharp's Waterloo, which is that Waterloo itself is drama enough. You don't need to add much in the way of hype because you've got the drama right there.
Yeah. That square thing, the bloodthirsty picture I gave you for your birthday.
Yes, exactly that.
With all the dead people. That was my birthday gift to Zach, was a picture of a lot of dead people.
The squares are really interesting. Like, I had to give a talk. I was asked to give a talk. Had to. It's a bit harsh. I was asked to give a talk to.
No one has to push you to talk, Marcus.
and I used a clip from the cavalry charge, because it was a cavalry regiment I was giving a talk to, and then I used stills of the cavalry squares from Waterloo, because it's one of the most accurate depiction of not just one square, but of multiple squares. That aerial shot Will was talking about is really quite accurate. In fact, I always thought it was a bit strange that some of the squares is shown as triangles. And then only in recent readings, you see that some of the regiments were so depleted, they go down to just like really rough little formations, because they don't have enough men to form four sides. And that's in there. And to get that like sense of drama, sense of horror, like that's only can be achieved by having thousands of people. If it was CGI, when I think of CGI soldiers, I always think of the Brad Pitt Troy. You see them like
they all move too quickly, don't they?
Jumping each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't move right. And something you just don't get is like that sense of impact with man meets horse, and then the closing up of people being like, if I can say it, fucking terrified.
Yeah,
like
Gladiator's good for that at the beginning, isn't it?
Going, yeah, let's go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Something else that you've already mentioned, that camera angle, because it's a bit silly about Napoleon, but they did, and it would be like not fair to say that they didn't take a lot of inspiration from War and Peace, which was 4 years before Waterloo, with the aerial camera shots. But they're very, for a techie historian nerd, and all three of you are techie historian nerds, I'm proud, that must be great to see those aerial panoramic shots of a battlefield, of the Battle of Waterloo in action. Will's grinning.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that the aerial shots add so much to it. And again, like we were just saying, the scale, I mean, interesting to me is how small the battlefield of Waterloo itself is. And I think the aerial shots, I mean, they could have done it even more in terms of trying to cram people in, to actually emphasise how everyone was crammed into these sort of 3 square miles where everything was happening. And I think looking from above just really adds to the idea that everyone was sort of having it out in a very small area. And I think that really portrays that really well.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of combining that with what Marcus was saying, for me, it's the interplay between the two. You get the kind of the macro scale of kind of looking down on multiple regiments. They're all firing on cavalry or firing on French columns advancing, whatever it might be, or they're in bayonet hand-to-hand fighting. But you see that from the top, but you also see it at ground level because they managed to get in some of the stories of the rank and file, like this guy who gets promoted to corporal. He's a kind of a running character throughout the day of Waterloo itself on the 18th of June. And to be able to play the two off is where the film really comes together. And it doesn't just become this big kind of grand strategy nerd fest of who moved where. It's also about that deeply personal element of the fact that people to the left and the right of you are having their heads blown off by cannonballs and things, really horrific wounds. And you're a hair's breadth from death, and there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to stand there and take it, which is one of the most incredible things about combat during this period. It's not like today where you can be proactive and duck and cover and fire off your own volition.
Utter nonsense of standing there and waiting till it's your turn to fire again.
Yeah. That's there. And I really like, actually, when Zach was saying one of my favourite parts is this corporal and they're having their gin ration, a tot of gin, and the guy next to him refuses it because he's religious. And he says something along the lines of, there's nothing worse than being on the battlefield stood next to a friend of the Almighty. Because he's basically going, well, it's not going to be him who dies, is it? So that means he's here.
Statistically, my odds just went down. Zach?
The other thing that I like is there's this moment, and I don't know if Marcus and Will can remember more of this than I do, but I'm sure there's this guy who sees all of the carnage around him and he just flips. He has a kind of a mental breakdown partway through.
No, they're both raising their hands.
Do you guys want me to shut up and just chip in there?
Will's particularly excited.
I'm guessing that's the bit in the squares, and it's getting the
exactly.
Why do we all kill each other? Why do we do it?
Me and my friend, when we're drunk, we often pause and just go, "Why? Why do we?" Just kind of the same thing, the same carnage.
That's the scars of a PhD.
That's a bit like me when I just sometimes go, "Now, Maitland, they won't stand." But okay.
There is no hope for any of you.
It's a good film for drunk quotes, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
I will ask you, first of all, I want to say, what have you guys got in retort for Rotten Tomatoes who rate this at 27%? Marcus is making hand gestures. Will's laughing. Zach looks like, that's Zach's I want to swear but I'm too much of a gentleman face. But I know exactly.
I've done too many of these. You've learned to read me, Alex. It's not good.
For those that aren't familiar with Zach's faces, or you can't see him because you haven't got the video feed of this, but his face says, fuck off.
Like 27%. Just that's not on. It's in the top films ever made, in humble opinion. I mean, not a good sounding board here, but I think you're going to agree with me. It's a fantastic film. It's
Peter
really
Jackson
good.
says it inspired him.
Well, yeah, Peter Jackson has his own cavalry charge, doesn't he? The Siege of Minas Tirith in Return of the King. So,
now you really
he
are
has
into
50
nerd
horses
territory now, aren't you?
Exactly.
Guys, right, okay, let's screw Rotten Tomatoes. What is the best moment in the entire film, Zach?
Cavalry charges, got to be. Although I like the kind of the defence of Hougoumont, I think the cavalry charge, because there are two of them. There's the British cavalry charge, which famously overextends itself, goes all the way to the French gun line, and then comes back. But then you've got the French one, and I think the way that they do both of those is just brilliant in terms of how catastrophically wrong it goes for both sides when it comes to cavalry, which was really quite crucial in terms of two key turning points in the battle where it could have gone either way.
Yeah, for me, definitely the cavalry charges. In terms of the squares, like I was saying earlier, and then, the Scots Graves charge is iconic in terms of them coming forward. Obviously it didn't happen quite like that, but, open ground like that. But I think the cavalry charges are amazing bits of the film. So, yeah, that's what I'd go with, I think.
See, there's a bit, and I know it's historically inaccurate, but I just don't care enough because it's great. Wellington shouting, "Now, Maitland, they won't stand." ordering the guards up to fire by volley. The bit that's historically inaccurate is they kind of fire from all the way standing, a bit like Zulu. And it didn't happen like that because they would have ended up shooting each other in the back. But as somebody who loathes Napoleon, like that moment very quickly gets followed by... I know, Zach's shocked at this information. So quiet about it. It is so quickly followed by Le Garde Recul, so the old guard, the Imperial Guard as well, the Middle Guard, famously, stepping back. And you just know, like, it's over. It's like 40 years of war. We've finally beaten the ogre. Yes. And you do cheer, like, even if it's just internally, because you're trying to watch it with, like, friends and family, but normally I don't, and I just let it go and give it a cheer. We've finally done it. It's great. It's a culmination. It's an epic film. It's a long film. And so kind of almost reaching an end, it builds. And the story of Waterloo is so dramatic. It needs a dramatic ending. And if that ending is, it did happen, Wellington going in and micromanaging the orders for the Guards Brigade in regiment by regiment. Brilliant. You can just give Wellington more credit, which is only ever a good thing.
As if you haven't done so for the last 45 minutes, sell the film. Why should everybody go and watch it to celebrate this anniversary, Will?
Just because it's a great film, great war film in terms of giving a basic outline of the battle, and it's inspired so many people over the years that I think it's an absolute must to go and watch it if you're interested in military history.
Zach?
If you can't be bothered to read a book on Waterloo, don't go and do a Wikipedia page, because the Wikipedia page will give you some stuff that's wrong, that's probably in the film anyway. But if you watch the film, you'll have to use less brain power, you'll enjoy yourself more, and so you'll probably get bitten by the Napoleonic bug and want to listen to more History Hack episodes about the Napoleonic Wars. So,
and your podcast. Look at you, Zack White, man of the people. Marcus?
Yeah, it's the closest I think we can do. I actually quite like Vanity Fair because I didn't expect myself to like it, but there's nothing I like it. But Sharp, I love Sharp, but it's not accurate. Waterloo, it's as most accurate as we're kind of probably ever going to get, because when someone comes to do a remake, and they will, it will have a cast of about 12 people and 10,000 CGI'd men jumping around really weirdly. It won't have the thousands of horses. It won't have the thousands of men. And you'll be able to tell this feels like Waterloo. And it kind of pays tribute to the people who were there. It has real quotes, so as close as accurate as we can have quotes from Napoleon and Wellington. So it ticks the historical boxes. It's got a good soundtrack and a good ending.
Boom. I say, if we're allowed out this time next year, we all go over there and watch it together, get shit-faced, play the drinking games as close to the battlefield as possible. If you have enjoyed this,
we'll do that, Alex, and we'll be drinking Waterloo beer, I promise you, which is delicious, and you can all wave swords of mine around and stuff.
Speak for yourself. I'm going to be on Belgian gin. Guys, if you have enjoyed this, join us on Friday, because we will be down the pub debating the greatest war film in history. And these two hypocrites, neither of them have picked Waterloo. Just ignore everything they've just said. Will, you're welcome to join us as well. Thank you so much for coming on to celebrate the anniversary of the film. I hope we've encouraged people to go and watch it and given them a bit of the background in the history, and also a bit of the background to a bit of cinematic history as well. Join us tomorrow when Freya Gowley will be with us to talk all about the history of the home. She has a new book coming out which looks at art in the home, and the home, I don't know, as a piece of art maybe, how we treat our personal space and how that changed massively in the 18th century. Really, really interesting. And what's even more interesting is to go forward now and see how we're responding in similar ways as a result of being forced to lock down for coronavirus. So don't miss that. We are now on YouTube. We are posting all of our new episodes on there, and we have our own channel, and we are gradually posting all of the back episodes because we have been made aware of the fact that you can only find the last 100 on some platforms. So you can go and listen to your heart's content and laugh at the cartoons and have a great time. So do go over there and subscribe. Don't forget, you can become a patron of History Hack for as little as $1 a month. Just go to www.historyhack.podbean.com. It will help us keep going in the aftermath of the coronavirus, and we would really appreciate it, as we would love to do so.